open borders, shameful abandonment, disregard for human life, the prospect of more mandates and lockdowns, and the list goes on. Now more than ever, we need to stick together. Voting alone is not enough. We must use our dollars to support like-minded companies that fight for our rights and beliefs. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider who shares your values. Last year, we gave more than $500,000 to conservative causes. With your support, we'll give more than $1.5 million this year. It's time to band together and support companies that truly love America and fight for our freedoms. Will you join us?
This is Kentucky's Voice Radio, covering the latest state and local issues with Tom Fallbush, Bob Scott, and Jim Waters.
And welcome, everybody, to Kentucky's Voice. Your host for the day, Andrew Cooprider, your Wednesday host. I know everybody's really excited to hear my wonderful voice. As always, we want to welcome you to Kentucky's Voice, where we talk about Kentucky politics. I have a fantastic guest today. We're going to be discussing the elections going on across the state. I have Chris Wiese, constitutional attorney. If you want to jump into the conversation, I encourage you to go ahead and shoot us over a text at 502-571-0970. Once again, that is 502-571-0970. 0970, 502-571-0970. That's the Kentucky Voice text line. But Chris Wiese, constitutional attorney and political insider. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Why don't you give everybody just, if you know, this is out of Louisville, obviously. In statewide politics, insiders know who you are. In Northern Kentucky, you're obviously very well known. Constitutional attorney, how many times have you argued in front of the Supreme Court?
The U.S. or Kentucky Supreme Court?
Both.
So I think I've had two in front of the Kentucky Supreme Court. I've never argued one in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, although we did have, we got some relief for the New York Amish against the New York Attorney General in December. They just wiped the lower court order. Those are a little more rare, the U.S. Supreme Court cases, but we've obviously had some stuff up there. Big win last December. A lot in the Sixth Circuit, which is the Federal Court of Appeals that's over Kentucky, and some in the state Supreme Court too.
And to give people an idea of the kind of cases you deal with, I mean, obviously, full disclosure, you're my attorney on a few cases, but, a constitutional attorney, what are you arguing about?
I mean, I think we kind of got a bit of a, claim to fame, if you will, when we started suing the governor over the lockdowns. Obviously, we got the order out of the Sixth Circuit that reopened churches in Kentucky, had a federal court strike down his order that, confined everybody to the state. I think we did a case for landlords in Kentucky over the eviction ban. I did the Ramsett case when he was holding BLM rallies outside the Capitol while threatening to arrest lockdown protesters. That went up to the Sixth Circuit. They called what the governor did a quintessential First Amendment violation. So, I mean, I'm not on Andy Beshear's Christmas list by any means. We've done some federally significant cases. I think we did against the Biden administration on behalf of some folks in the Army and the Air Force. We got some class relief on the vaccine mandate, keeping folks in the service. So we've done, some pretty significant cases, still doing significant cases.
You sued Nancy Pelosi?
We sued Nancy Pelosi. That was fun. Yeah, we're definitely, doing significant federal litigation, kind of all over at this point. I mean, the COVID stuff really has sort of ballooned up my practice into more of a national practice. It's been interesting.
And so on top of course, being a constitutional attorney, a part of what you serve as is kind of would you say an advisor to a lot of our state legislators on constitutional issues. You also kind of work alongside some groups and campaigns as such. You used to be mayor of Fort Mitchell, right?
Yeah, a long time ago. Yeah, a long time ago.
So, you've got some political experience as well as campaign experience. So when we come back, I guess we'll dive in and start talking about the Senate race that's going on, kind of get your feel on it. Just as somebody who's known all the players for a long time, who's working on the campaigns, the ins and outs. It's interesting to hear. If people have questions on these races and what's going on, they can feel free to shoot us over a text 502 571 0970. Once again, that is 502 571 0970. Here with Chris Weiss, constitutional attorney, political insider. We're going to be discussing the Senate race. We'll discuss the 4th District race. We'll discuss the 6th District race. A lot of news going on in those over the last week, too. So we'll have that when we get back here on Kentucky's Voice.
Back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And you're back on Kentucky's Voice here with Chris Weiss, constitutional attorney, political insider here in Kentucky. We're going to be discussing the Senate race going on right now in Kentucky, the race to replace McConnell. You want to join into the conversation, 502-571-0970. As we're discussing these races, if there's something you think we're not considering, we're not talking about, please feel free to chime in. 502-571-0970. So, Chris, pretty recently you actually online had endorsed Daniel Cameron running for Senate. You made that post online. It got thousands of likes across platforms and shares, hundreds of comments, a lot of it positive, some negative. Tell me, as you look at that Senate race now, and I know lots changed recently, but why did you endorse Daniel Cameron? How do you think that race is plays out?
First of all, you have to look at that race and start with who are the viable candidates. At the time, the viable candidates were Andy Barr and Daniel Cameron, to a lesser degree Nate Morris. I think he was polling around 14%. There are some other folks in the race. I've seen polling under like 3 to 4%. And when you look at it, and you look particularly, Andy Barr is a bit of a known quantity because he's got a voting record. That voting record is generally inconsistent with anything that I've ever supported, whether, it was, he was for amnesty for illegal immigrants for a while. And then, recently has sort of changed his position on that because it's unpopular. I have concerns he's going to go back to it, once he's elected. And all of the Mitch McConnell people have lined up behind Andy Barr. My understanding, by the way, is that the Barr endorsement in part was a deal with McConnell and the White House over Mitch's vote on the SAVE Act, kind of the backroom sausage making. And, I look at that race and, Daniel Cameron, some folks criticize him, for not necessarily being the strongest fighter, but he's always been a principled guy in terms of, constitutional rights, defending the Constitution. We did a lot of the COVID-19 cases we were talking about before, the Air Force case. His office on the vaccine mandate and religious believers filed an multi-state amicus brief in support of that effort. I just think Daniel is very consistent. Daniel's been very consistent on the life issue. Andy Barr, did this questionnaire that was kind of wishy-washy on the life issue. Daniel's been a champion for life. So I looked at it and I just, looked at that race and said, Daniel is principled. Daniel will fight. He's not as maybe in your face as you and I are, Andrew. I mean, that's not Daniel Cameron's style, but, I looked at that and I said, for sure, Daniel Cameron heads and tails above the opposition. And, I've known Daniel for a while. Like I said, I think he's a good man. I think he, is principled. And so I endorsed him. The president, as you know, recently came out and endorsed Barr, cut a deal with Morris to drop out of the race and gave Moore an ambassador.
Do you think, on that subject, do you think that they looked at the polling and said, even with the Trump endorsement, if Morris stays in, Andy Barr won't win? Or do you think they looked at it and said, Morris has enough ties to the Trump group, they didn't want to make people upset, and so they offered him this because he was in with the Trump crowd? What do you think drove the decision to get him to drop out?
I saw internal polling about, it was about a week and a half old, and Daniel was actually up 2 points in that polling. And this was polling I think the Barr folks had done. So Daniel was up. Daniel and Barr were both kind of in that low 30s range. Morris was in the 14% range. I do think
I leave a lot undecided too.
A lot, and there's a lot. I know we're going to talk about KY4 in a bit. There's undecideds there too, a decent percentage of them. And I think they looked at it and they're like, well, maybe we can get that 14% over to Barr. I mean, the issue is if you're looking for an outsider or the business perspective or whatever it is with Morris, I just don't see that going to Barr being kind of the establishment guy. But there are voters, and I think last night's Indiana results certainly show that there are voters that say whatever President Trump says, I'm going to do. And maybe that's okay for the short term because it backs the deals that I think are in part being made over these endorsements in DC. But long term, I question if that's actually good for the Republican Party. And there is concern that we should have last night in Ohio. When you look at voter turnout between the Democratic primary and the Republican primary, like if there isn't a change of course in the next 3 months, I think we're going to have a blue wave bloodbath in the fall, and it's going to be a problem. And so, it was interesting. I was at my daughter's swim meet over the weekend. My mom was there, 75 years old on a fixed income, voted for Trump. And she actually lives over in Cincinnati, Ohio. I mean, I'm in Northern Kentucky, as you know, right across the river. And she made the statement that they're just really disgusted with the economy and gas prices, and it wasn't what Trump promised. She made that statement, and I just was like, we can have a problem this fall. And I don't think it's too late to change course, but I mean, this fall may not be pretty, even though there's been some significant redistricting wins in both the U.S. Supreme Court. I think the Virginia Supreme Court argument was helpful there. I think the redistricting effort may end up tilting slightly towards the Republicans, but I think it's more likely than not at this point we're going to lose the House, and that's going to be a problem, and it's going to be a problem for President Trump to get his agenda done.
And so, talking about Indiana, because we've seen a lot of people mentioning about the Trump endorsements winning in the state Senate race. My inclination there is one, a state Senate race is not like a federal Senate race. It's not like a congressional race. Just for lack of a better term, a lot of voters don't even know. They can be 4 out of 4. I vote in every single primary, and they have no clue who their state senator even is at all, And so
right.
I had a conversation with a political scientist on my normal show. People can check it out, and theandrewshow.com. You can check out those episodes. And we discussed about how voters take shortcuts to figure out who to vote for. And if it's a lower information, low money races, I don't know how much money was spent in those Senate races. A simple shortcut of, well, Trump endorsed this guy, so I'm going to vote for him, will win out over maybe larger considerations. I mean, I see this in this own own group of hosts here, where there are hosts that are super MAGA, super for Trump, and they'll sit there and say, I know we'll talk about the fourth. They'll say, look, Ed Gowron's endorsed by Trump. that's good enough for me, not knowing much about Ed, because realistically, none of us really know much about him, just based upon, we know he was a Navy SEAL for 30 years and that's it. I mean, I don't even know. I haven't even seen his wife. I had to research today if he had kids or not, and figure that out. You know, I still am not sure if he's married or divorced. The point is we don't know much about him, but he's Trump endorsed. That's good enough for us. But then those same people, when it comes to something like the Andy Barr and Daniel Cameron race, are like, I super support Daniel Cameron because he's not as establishment as Andy Barr. But at the same time, you say, well, but Andy Barr's Trump endorsed. Why is that not good enough for you here if that's good enough for you over there, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, there's a disconnect there. You know, and it's funny. I was at the Kenton County Republican dinner, and Kenton, you know, it's interesting up here in Northern Kentucky. If you go to Boone County, right, it is like hardcore conservative, you know, liberty to some degree, but just hardcore conservative over in Boone, right next door to Kenton. Kenton is very much an establishment county. And, you know, it was funny, you know, just to sort of see the Andy Barr support in Kenton, where I don't think he's got much at all in Boone. I don't know if the Trump endorsement will change that. It may or may not. But, you know, it is interesting. And, you know, but I think a lot of people know Andy Barr, right? I think Andy Barr is almost like the problem that Lindsey Graham has in South Carolina right now, where people know who he is. I mean, there's never been a war that Lindsey doesn't support. You know, there's never a spending bill that Lindsey doesn't support, or pork or special interests and so, you know, I do think voters have more information in the bigger races, you know, and I don't, you know, and the Indiana races are interesting too, because the incumbents were outspent substantially. I mean, substantially. Turning Point came in for door to door. And, you know, they generally won, but there was like one that's like a nail biter. It's like 30 votes, undecided today. There's another one where the incumbent won, notwithstanding the endorsement. Like, I think it depends on the district, how well they're known. You know, if not much information is in the race, I think the Trump endorsement matters more than if a lot of people know what they're getting and either they like it or they don't. And so, you know, there are some variables that I think are at play.
Well, and I think too, is if you're talking about the Trump endorsement and how it works out in campaigns, I think a lot of people seem to be forgetting the Brandon Herrera race that happened in Texas. That's a Trump endorsed incumbent who Brandon Herrera got more votes than in the primary before his opponent ended up dropping out in the runoff because of the sexual misconduct charges. But at the same time, 2 years ago, Brandon Herrera also ran against this guy, Trump-endorsed guy, and almost beat him there too as well, which speaks, and Brandon Herrera is a lot different, where he's got more of an online following and everything else. He's a different kind of candidate, but that obviously speaks to it. We're coming up on a break. If people want to jump into the conversation here, you go ahead and shoot us over a text, 502-571-0970. Once again, that is 502-571-0970. When we get back, I'll ask Chris how he thinks the Senate race will turn out, and then we'll start digging into the 4th District race, obviously a very fascinating and interesting race. But you're listening to Kentucky's Voice. Your host for the day, Andrew Cooperrider, joined by Chris Weiss, constitutional attorney, political insider here in Kentucky. Once again, if you want to text in your thoughts, 502-571.
back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And you're back on Kentucky's Voice, your host of the day, Andrew Cooperrider, here with Chris Weiss, constitutional attorney, political insider, talking about the elections going on. You can shoot us over a text, 502-571-0970. Once again, 502-571-0970. So, Chris, we discussed the Senate race a bit. You'd endorsed Daniel Cameron. We talked about why. How do you think that election actually ends up playing out? Do you think Daniel Cameron has a chance? What lines, if Daniel Cameron does have a chance, how does he have to execute in order to overcome the Trump-endorsed Andy Barr? Or do you think it's pretty much wrapped up in a done deal?
I think it's tough to say because I don't know how that 14% of the Morris vote is going to break. And obviously, I think if a lot of that breaks for Daniel,
and it would be a huge whiplash, too. I mean, it was a whiplash of attack Andy, amnesty Andy, he sucks. And then, obviously, Nate turning around and endorsing Andy Barr. I don't know how that whiplash, too, that may leave that 14% really sour.
It may, and it may leave him sour about the Trump deal. It may leave him sour about a lot of it. Obviously, there was the Charlie Kirk endorsement before Charlie passed to Nate. I don't know how that's going to break. And I think over the next week, I'm interested to see. Obviously, Daniel's doing this giant tour around Kentucky. Andy Barr declined to do a debate after the endorsement came out. Does that sort of arrogance sit well with the voters or not? I don't know. I've seen, some folks that have said, hey, listen, Trump endorses Barr, so that's good enough for me. I've seen some of that online. I've seen other folks saying, listen, I'm with Daniel. I've always been with Daniel. I think the Right to Life folks are with Daniel. The Second Amendment folks are with Daniel. The more conservative folks, the church-going folks are with Daniel. I think, I hate to say it, I think that race could go either way. I think they both are over 40%, though. And there's this other 20%. There's been typically in polling around 12% undecided. I'm interested to see how. I think Daniel could have a path. He had higher statewide name ID going in. Obviously, the Trump endorsement helps Barr. Barr's got a not America First voting record. Daniel, I think, is maybe more aligned with what the campaign promises of Trump. But like I said, there was this deal with McConnell. Barr's got way more money. He's got all that McConnell money. All McConnell people are helping Barr. They're looking to keep their jobs. It's an interesting race. I mean, I don't want to handicap it yet because I think it's in flux because of, all this has happened in the last week. I'll be able to handicap it better, I think, in the next 7 days. But right now, I do think Daniel still has a path. I think the path has narrowed. We'll see.
You'd mentioned in the last segment about you're talking about viable candidates. And one of the things that I've seen, obviously, out of the there's 8 other people running for the seat that just aren't as well known. But obviously out of that group, the most well known, out of the less well known with low money is Michael Farris. And you'd mentioned about the viable candidates. Obviously, I think we're both in the same mindset that it's just a numbers game. There'll be probably around, I estimate, somewhere around 400,000 or so people who vote in this election.
Yeah.
Might be a little less. I think Rand Paul's last primary, which was midterm, obviously there wasn't, though, a statewide open seat like this with the Senate. You'd think that would draw out a few more people when there's that kind of campaigning going on. I believe he had right around 380,000 or so people that voted in that primary. So, I would expect it to be 400,000. And frankly, it comes down to just a numbers game. Even if somebody like Farris, who says he's popular with a lot of the online crowd, you look at it and you say, okay, let's say you have 2,000 really, really diehard people. And I don't know if he does, but let's just say that. You have 2,000 really high diehard people. And if on average those 2,000 convince 10 people to vote for him, which is a fair amount, I think, just my experience in campaigns, but 10 people to vote for him, that's still only, 20,000, 30,000 people. Even if you got, 100 you have 2,000 people and they got 100 people to vote for him, right? You start running into these numbers, and that 100 is really high. You run into these numbers where it's just not that many people pay attention to politics. I am involved in politics. I have a public page on Facebook. I have a personal page on Facebook. My personal page has like no politics on it. I'm very politically involved, and my personal page is all dirt bikes and hunting videos. That's like all it is, because that's what I engage with personally. And so I think you do run into that numbers game. But my question for you is, do you think Ferris plays any kind of a spoiler? Do you think a lot of I've seen this, Nate Morris people end up on Ferris? I've seen them pushing that online at least. Do you think any of that happens at all, or no?
For that online crowd, it's just a matter of perspective. I mean, I hate to say this, but like, it reminds me of, like some of the third party stuff that you occasionally see where some of the third parties have had an online presence, but don't have an actual presence. I mean, Ferris has raised no money. He's not on TV. He's not on radio. He's gone to Republican Party events, and he's got this online presence. And I think his campaign page is around 2,500 followers.
Well, he's and to be fair too, he's kind of, to be honest, kind of sporadically at events. I know I've been to 2 or 3 Republican events and Lincoln Day dinners, one in Owen County, I believe Kenton County as well. And at least in Owen County, he didn't speak, nor did he have anybody there even handing out anything for Ferris. I know in Kenton County, he didn't speak.
He didn't show up. Nobody from the campaign was there.
Nobody from the campaign showed up in Kenton County either. And I forget what other county I was in where like nobody showed up from the campaign either. So even that, the ground game's kind of sporadic there as far as the events go that you typically see.
Right. They don't have door knockers out. I know the other campaigns have door knockers out, so there's no ground game because they raise no money. Like, my sense is Ferris will be lucky to clear 3%. Is that a spoiler if the Barr and Cameron race are super close? Perhaps. Does that cost one or the other the vote? Who knows? Because who knows how those people would otherwise vote? I mean, maybe they're folks that would never vote for either one. I don't know, right? I mean, maybe they're folks that would maybe lean towards one or the other. I think it's just pure speculation to figure out, is he spoiling? Is he not? I mean, I think for my purposes, it's enough to know that he's not viable. And like, he's got very, very vocal supporters. He's got this core of maybe 100, 150 people that are like all in. Like I said, I'm guessing he will get between 3, maybe 4%, at best. And, that'll be it. And, and I hate to say that that's modern politics, but like it is, right? Like, we are inundated with, the folks that are spending money in this race. I mean, we're going to talk about KY4 in a minute. I mean, that's another race, right, where there's money, huge money on both sides of that. I just think you cannot run a modern campaign for any statewide office without substantial funds. I mean, you kind of know that with the state treasurer race, right? Like Mark Metcalf came in and dumped a ton of money in. That was kind of the final bell, right? Like, yeah. I mean, it's very, very hard to overcome that. And I think, and I'm not here to like detract the Ferris people, but I think, they've got, some rosy colored glasses about how this is going to end up. And those of us that have been around and watching long enough know that it's just not going to end the way that they hope it will.
Yeah. That is certainly, I think that's part of the problem. And it's hard too, because obviously there's a lot of people that support him, that friends of mine that I know well and everything else. And I understand, the idea of voting because you don't like the other two and for whatever reason. And I understand that completely. And I'm not here to deride anybody for doing that. But that being stated, to your point, it just, and they could say, well, he's not viable because you won't say he's viable or something like that. But it's just, you've been around campaigns long enough. It's just the numbers are what they are. The voters are what they are. No amount of wishing can change that. Unfortunately, we may disagree with that. We may wish every voter was super informed and did research, but that always doesn't happen. When we come back, we'll start digging into the Thomas Massie, Ed Gowron race. Obviously, you're there in Northern Kentucky. If you want to join into that conversation, that's 502-571-0950. 0970 502 571 0970.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And you're back on Kentucky's Voice, joined today by Chris Weiss, constitutional attorney, political insider, all-around good guy. I like him. Chris, thanks for joining us. If you want to join into the conversation, we're going to be talking about the Massey-Ed Gowrine race because, one, Chris, you actually live in the district, so I think that's incredibly important as well because you're seeing it. I live in the district, so we can talk about what we're seeing in the race too. A lot of mail, but if you want to text in, that's 502-571-0970. Once again, 502-571-0970. So, Chris, Kentucky 4th, we've got Ed Gowrine versus Thomas Massie. Let me ask you, how do you think, what do you think's going on in that race right now? How do you think the current lay of the land is? Let's say that.
My sense is, at least right this second, that Thomas Massie is still up. And I've seen polling, internal polling, on that race. When I say Massie is up, though, like it is a bit of a nail biter. I mean, the most recent I've seen was from a week ago, and I mean, let me read this to you. I mean, this was a week ago, very, very end of April. Massie was at 46%, Gowrine at 40%, and 14% undecided. That's close. That's 6 points. What was it? Was it plus or minus? I think it was plus or minus like 3%. Yeah. So I mean, it is, super close. And, what's interesting, I don't just look at the polling, but my wife is from one of the big Northern Kentucky families, and they, my father-in-law, his brother-in-laws all go out to lunch, every couple weeks together. And my wife's uncle is just an absolute rabid Trump supporter who is convinced that Thomas Massie is an absolute traitor. And my father-in-law and others in that group are like, how is it a traitor to vote for the Epstein files or the Big Beautiful Act, vote against the BBB because it was all this spending and look at the price of gas and the Iran thing, and that's price of gas too. Like,
well, and I think,
yeah,
you've mentioned price of gas a few times, and I think this is something I didn't realize, because I think this is important to mention. So I live in the district, but I live more southern in the district, and most time I get my gas in Georgetown, and I'll go to a Walmart gas station, get 10 cents off a gallon because I'm a Walmart Plus member, and I'll pay right around $3.89 a gallon. I was up in northern Kentucky just this past weekend with my son. We were going to go play airsoft in Cincinnati. And I realized, just like literally 45 minutes north of my house, I'm about an hour away from northern Kentucky, gas there is like $5 a gallon.
Yes.
And like, that's worth mentioning. That is a huge difference. But it's also worth mentioning. I think that honestly causes probably a lot more angst too, because people up in northern Kentucky travel to these other areas and they're seeing gas that's like $1 cheaper a gallon. And they're like, what's going on here?
Well, I don't know I think the gas prices are on the rise everywhere. I mean, obviously there's all this stuff over in Iran, you're blocking, the oil flow is plugged up and being blocked right now while all this is going on. And, gas prices turn into food prices, turn into milk prices, turn into egg prices, because all that stuff has to be distributed. And so and that's a problem for the midterms. And it's a problem, I think, I do think it's going to have an impact on this race. Like, I've never seen anything like what's going on in KY4. I mean, there's TV ads going both ways. I was watching the Derby Saturday night. My daughter was at a swim meet all weekend. My wife signed me up to time and like told me, the day before I was going to be timing. And I'm like, okay, great. So I was going to go down to Louisville. Actually, some friends had some tickets to the Derby. I didn't end up going, but, I'm watching it and these ads are like going back and forth. And that's what we've been seeing on TV for probably the last 2 months, right? And then, going the other way, right, against Gowron, right? He left the Republican Party, in a fit of protest when President Trump got the nomination. He, he won't answer abortion questions, suggesting that he's probably pro-choice, he won't debate to get into some of his stuff. And his whole campaign is basically, I will be a yes man for anything President Trump wants. Right. And like those of us that are a little more discerning are like, well, like I agree with like 90% of what President Trump's doing, but like, I don't agree with him about the Epstein files. By the way, I never thought the president was in the Epstein files. I think the billionaire donors are in the Epstein files because they are. And, and frankly, they should all be in prison. And then there's this fight about, foreign funding, the stuff on isolationism. I think AIPAC has spent around 10 million. That's kind of the Israeli PAC. And Thomas Massie is out here saying, I'm America first. I'm not Israel first. You won't see me posing like Andy Barr in front of an Israeli flag. Like, that's just not who I am. Like, and so there's this fight back and forth. And yet, if you look at Thomas Massie's votes, and they're like, oh, he votes with the squad. And I'm like, no, he votes against spending bills. The squad is doing it to be Democrats are doing it to be obstructionist. Massie's against massive spending, regardless of who's in power. So like, if you're a little more discerning, Thomas Massie and who he is. I think that's why he's held on, notwithstanding the endorsement, why he still has a lead. But like, my wife texted me, she's been on a work trip, and I guess she got some text yesterday, and I can let me read it.
Well, and
yeah.
There's also been, in that race, there's been a recent ad that I think I want to discuss real quick. But I think what's interesting about that race, when the problem is you only have two options, vote yes or no. You don't have like, no, but for different reasons than those people over there. That's not really an option. Democrats will vote no on something because it doesn't spend enough. Massie's voting no because it spends too much. It's like two totally different reasons to vote no on something, and I get that. And I think that creates an interesting vibe in the race because, and I understand people calling him a rhino and everything else, and everybody has a right to their own opinion, but just factually, when you look at the reasoning and the votes and why he says he votes against things, you're kind of running at him from the left. I have to imagine because we mentioned those Indiana primaries and people looking at that to say, look at how good Trump's endorsements did. I have to imagine those people that voted against redistricting are probably more moderate Republicans, and the Republicans running against them were ideologically probably farther to the right than those they took out. In this case, the main knock on Massey is that he's too far to the right almost. Is a lot of times they'll say, well, he doesn't get anything done because he's not willing to work with people because he's too principled or he's too stuck in his ways on this. So essentially, okay, so he's too stubbornly far right, which is an interesting, I guess, lane of attack, and it's interesting to see how that plays out. We did have a text come in, though, if you want.
Yeah.
People can go ahead and shoot in their text, 502-571-0970, 502-571-0970. And it said, this was about Thomas Massey the other night on KET. He said, Massey stumbled a lot in his KET interview. I do want to clarify, though, that wasn't an interview. It wasn't supposed to be an interview. That was supposed to be a debate between Ed Gowron and Massey, and Ed didn't show up.
I think that's the sixth debate that he has
I've
missed.
seen as many as 8, personally. And so I've seen people try to claim, well, you don't debate when you're up. Well, objectively speaking, Ed Gowron isn't up. He, at the best, they're like tied, is the best case scenario you could think, is that they're within the margin of error of being tied. Though there hasn't been a poll that I've seen, either internal or public, within the last ever this entire year that shows Ed Gowron in the lead. So that's just not true. So it does lead to a question of, when you're in a close race, generally you do show up to debates, and he's just not.
Right. And I think the other problem, I mean, some people said, well, Thomas Massey has never debated his opponents. Well, he did in 2012 when he ran as an open seat. It was a competitive race. Like, I understand not debating when somebody is polling at 12%, right? Like I get that. But Ed Gowron is trying out for a job. He wants to be the next congressman. And it begs the question, if you're not willing to show up and debate for your positions and show why Thomas Massey is this guy that you're claiming to be, in part, Ed is lying about Thomas, right? I mean, I saw some ad about him voting against the SAVE Act. Thomas actually voted for that. I mean, there's a roll call bill. You can get on Congress's website, look at that. I'm like, so you're lying about it, and you probably don't want to be called on it. And yet, if we're going to send you to D.C., one of the primary things that congressmen do is they get on the floor and they debate for their positions. And if you're not willing to debate, it's kind of like a job tryout. You're not really showing up to the interview. Why should we hire you? I mean, that's the question that I've heard. And I think, I don't think it's helping Ed not to debate and not to show up. But maybe the calculus is, if he does and he shows everybody who he is, that could be a real problem. I mean, there was kind of that Howard Dean moment at President Trump's rally where he was screaming like a bit of a lunatic. And I don't know, I don't think it's helping him. But I think the plan is we're just going to spend a bunch of money and see if we can knock Thomas Massey out. We'll see if that works. That 14% undecided. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how that's going to break. It probably doesn't help that Ed's not showing up to these debates. And
that leads into another question I had, and we're coming up on a break here in a minute. Once again, if people want to get in their text, talk about their feelings, hear Chris respond to them. 502-571-0970. Once again, 502-571-0970. We've seen a recent ad that, for me, seems like, and it reinforces the idea that Gowron knows that campaign knows that they're down. And it was this Hail Mary ad that has a lot of AI footage in it that I don't know how the voters will respond. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's essentially an ad that shows Thomas Massey holding hands with Ilhan Omar and AOC and them out to dinner, and it's supposed to look like footage of them showing up to a hotel to be engaged in sexual congress, but all the footage is fake. Everything about that's fake. We'll discuss how you think voters will respond to that when we get back here on Kentucky's Voice. I'm your host for the day, Andrew Cooperrider, 502-571-0970.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And you're back on Kentucky's Voice. If you want to text in 502-571-0970. Once again, 502-571-0970. We're discussing the elections. We've been talking about Kentucky's 4th District, Ed Gowron versus Thomas Massie, here with Chris Weiss, constitutional attorney, political insider here in Kentucky. So recently we saw, I believe, the Gowron campaign, or maybe a Gowron PAC, put out this ad. I described it in the prior segment, but basically it's supposed to be like hotel found footage of Thomas Massie essentially involved in an affair with AOC and Ilhan Omar. Now, and them out to dinner, and them checking into a hotel lobby, holding hands together. And then the ad says he's caught in a throuple. Okay. Obviously, all the footage is fake. That was all created by AI. Thomas Massie has never, I believe, had dinner with AOC or Ilhan Omar. And I don't think Thomas Massie has ever had a credible allegation or a allegation. I've never even seen a allegation of him engaging in any kind of sexual misconduct with anybody. That might be why they don't like him. Anyway, so
well, I mean, that's another Barr thing, right? Where Barr voted to keep all those sexual assault and harassment settlements secret. Massey voted along with, I think Nancy Mace was pushing that as a sexual assault survivor to release all of that congressional misconduct. I mean, he's
And so that ad to me seems like a Hail Mary for this reason. It has some potential to blow up in your face.
I mean, I've seen that ad, and that ad begins with the disclaimer that this is all AI and fake at the bottom, right? I mean, they did that on purpose because of the law that was passed about disseminating AI, deep fakes. And, are there voters are there some voters that could be fooled by it? Maybe. I don't know. Like, to your point, if people realize that they've gone to this length to deliberately deceive, maybe they would ask the question, what else is the Ed Gowron campaign deceiving people about? And when you start asking that question, maybe you're like, everything this guy is saying is a deception. I've seen like the 72% Massey donors are Democrats. Like they've dug into that, and like that is false. But like, these rumors start, and then they just blow up, and people just keep spreading them in political races. And I mean, I don't know. I think the question really is, will that move the needle? And I think that depends on, does anybody believe that the commercial that says that it's a fake, that begins and says that it's AI created, will anyone believe that it's real? And, I guess it's a question of, how stupid are the voters? That's the question.
Well, and for me, what's something interesting that I've seen, and we see this in the polling, is that those over 65 plus are like 66, 33, 66% for Ed Gowron. But those under like 30, I think, or something, are the exact opposite, 66, 33 for Massie versus Ed. But in the middle, the middle group seems to be right around the 35 to 55 group range. And I just wonder, I mean, I would think the people who don't realize like something's AI and how AI works probably falls into the older crowd, just because they just don't work with it every day like people younger do. It's not to say they're not intelligent, of course, or something like that. Right. They just, they're maybe not on social media as much. They haven't seen these things before like we have, and how good AI can be at creating these things. So really, when you look at the age range, the people who'd believe it are kind of the age range you already have. Once again, not saying they're dumb, just saying they just don't realize AI is that good. But the age range that's the swing age range is the type that recognize it's fake, I feel like, but still have like some morality around AI. The younger crowd to a degree would be like, but it's funny, But the middle group would be like, hey, this is deceptive, and we're actually really worried too right now about AI taking our jobs, AI doing this and AI doing that, and AI data centers, for an example. And so you wonder if they look at it and say, that is a really big turnoff to us, and that's the swing age. I guess that's my theory on it. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I think it's interesting.
So we got a text that came in that said, how about Joshua Ferguson replacing Rhino Brett Guthrie in District 2?
Yeah, I think, listen, I'm not here to we go over Brett Guthrie's voting record. It's got some issues. I think the problem is, it's the Michael Ferris problem. It's you haven't really raised any money. You're not on TV. Think about this. Like, they have spent $10 million on each side of Thomas Massie's race. I hate to say it, but I just don't think, and I know that there's races, I think there's some folks challenging Hal Rogers down in the fifth. You're not going to successfully unseat an incumbent congressman without, 7 figures or more. And I just, I don't think it's a viable race.
Someone else texted in and said, if Massie wins, he will backstab Trump. Your response?
It's funny. I think consistently Thomas Massie has voted for everything Thomas Massie always stands for, which is that I don't think Thomas Massie ever goes out, and I've known Thomas for a while, and says, I'm here to go and stick it to Trump. I think Thomas Massie says, I believe in fiscal responsibility. And so, if you're going to put a big, beautiful bill act in front of him, one of these omnibuses that, funds, by the way, abortions on the one hand, funds some other insane stuff, that's all tucked in on the sausage making process. And Massie goes and digs through the bill, and he's like, I can't vote for it, right? Is Massie for the Iran thing? No. Is Massie for foreign aid? No. Is Massie for the release of the Epstein files? Yeah. But I don't think it's about sticking it to President Trump. I've had conversations with Thomas Massie. Thomas Massie's like, these are my principles. And what's funny is, if you go to the Republican Party, the RNC's website, you pull the platform from 2024, and you line it up with Thomas Massie's votes, those votes are more consistent with that platform than some of these other things, right? So, are you voting? Is it that Thomas Massie's voting against President Trump, or is it Thomas Massie voting for the America First agenda? And when President Trump deviates from the agenda that was promised, Massie may not be there for him. I also think, Thomas Massie is consistent, and he, nobody gets mad at him when the Democrats are in power in the House, because, he votes against everything that they want when that happens. So like, this whole Thomas Massie angst, I think, is going to go away because unfortunately, I'm pretty sure we're going to lose the House right now unless this Iran thing gets resolved and the price of gas goes down before November. I mean, that's just my sense.
And the other thing too, and for example, take the Iran war. I've seen some people saying, well, Massie just proposed a war powers resolution on it to backstab Trump. But if you follow his voting record, his first year in Congress, he filed a war powers resolution to stop Obama from bombing Egypt. He fired a war powers resolution against Obama a few times. He fired a war powers resolution against Joe Biden. He filed a war powers resolution, I think, in Trump's first term, too. So, there's been several. That's pretty consistent. Now, someone else had texted in here. They said, I don't care a rip about any of these political ads. They are all one-sided. Obviously, the problem with Ed Gowrine is I have no idea what he stands for.
My father-in-law made the statement that he doesn't trust Ed Gowrine, that he thinks that, the defection from the Republican Party in 2016 shows that he's not a Trump guy. He's just a political opportunist. That was the statement my father-in-law made. And, he's in that 65-plus group. Like, I think Ed not debating and allowing kind of all this to come out. And the only thing Ed has said, he doesn't talk about who he is or what his platform is. He just says, I'm a rubber stamp for whatever the president wants. And like I said, I mean, that I think, that's going to get you some votes. But some people want a congressman that's going to think about every vote that they take, and is this good or bad for the people in my district? Not just, was it once or not?
The other issue, too, is there's a lot of wiggle room in there. I mean, for example, you can say you're pro-life, but are you for exemptions or are you against exemptions? Are you for a federal abortion ban or are you against it? A lot of that can be in that one phrase of I'm pro-life. And if you're refusing to answer any questions about it, because I know he refused to answer the questionnaires on this from Right to Life, both Northern Kentucky and state, how do we know where you stand on it?
Well, he went to a Boone County event. There's video of it. Ed did, and was asked these life questions, and he refused to answer. Like, I'm a lawyer. Generally, when a witness refuses to answer a question, it means they're hiding it, and they know that you won't like the answer they're going to give, right? And so, I think it's fair to infer that Ed Gowrine is pro-choice because he won't answer the life questions. Like, I think that's a fair inference. And so, what else is he for? I mean, obviously he's for spending money overseas. I mean, AIPAC isn't spending $8 million plus for any other reason than Ed is for spending money, and sending, more money overseas. I'm like, but it would be really helpful if he would actually tell us what he was for.
Another text came in saying Massie's a lone wolf and not a team player.
Yeah, I mean, I think, that I think is not a unfair characterization, except for I do think he votes with the Republican Party. Somebody's done an analysis 91% of the time. He forced the Epstein stuff. I know leadership got really mad. That was the breaking point with President Trump, by the way, release of those Epstein files. I don't know. I mean, do you want 100% lockstep, or do you want somebody that can think for themselves? I know Massie made everybody really mad in March of 2020 when he made Congress vote on that COVID bailout that blew up the economy. And, I don't know. I mean, at some point, everything's going to come home to roost. I read that Social Security right now is scheduled to run out in 2032. Those payments are going to stop unless something's done. Massie's been trumpeting that issue for a while. Is he a lone wolf, or is he the voice that's crying in the wilderness, on important issues, and maybe we ought to pay more attention to him?
The other thing too about not a team player, lone wolf, one thing is that I don't, it's funny we talk about the establishment, the deep state, these being problems, but then you knock a guy for not going along with the establishment and the deep state as being not a team player. It just seems like a weird thing. And also keep in mind, we're not electing congressmen per se, just my opinion, to be a team player. We're electing them to represent their district. whatever that may be. But, well, we're running out of time here. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining us today on Kentucky's Voice. It's good to see you again. You guys make sure you tune in tomorrow, 11 o'clock, different host. Till then, we'll be seeing you.